I can put them in the stock market. I can put them in this. I can put them in crypto. I can deploy it in liquidity. I can do so many things with my dollars. I think in the very early days, your success is not measured by number of users or dollars in the bank, but by how fast you can learn in a week. Especially for like early stage and first time founders, where I see them struggle is they have a very big vision and they want to execute it. And a lot of them think I'm going to start and build the big vision on day one.
Perhaps we could just start with, how would you introduce yourself at parties?
So, Shoukri Kattan. I think of myself as an entrepreneur and a CTO and a biohacker. So I've been in the tech industry for about 18 years, and I've always combined the passion for business and technology. I started my career about 17 years ago working for a startup in Israel we were doing cloud computing at the time, which is like very, very early days. So if I want to take us back to 2007, 8, even Amazon AWS was in beta at the time. They had like 1 or 2 products. And this was the time we were kind of working on a very ambitious cloud computing project. From there, moved to Canada in 2010 and was working for another startup. We got acquired eventually by a very big enterprise, Ericsson. Spent a couple of years in large companies, and at that time, I kind of, got lost my way a little bit. Like, you jump from a startup where, we were at the peak 200 people, and then you jump into a 100,000 people company. And because of all the processes, all the, the structure around it, it was a bit of a cultural shock for me.
Yeah.
And it was. And Ericsson is actually a great company to work for. They have a great culture. My brother still works for the company. But for me, I was extremely unhappy because I felt that, I had less of an impact, and my role and how I worked with my clients, all of that changed. And I felt just like tied by the processes. And so, it took me a bit of kind of, searching and stumbling until I decided, okay, yeah, I know why I'm not happy. It's just, this is not the game I want to be in. I want to be in the startup game. And so left Ericsson, and since that time, I've been predominantly working with early stage startups and established businesses who want to build technology, who don't have a tech team, don't have a tech arm. And this is where I come in as a fractional CTO to support them in building their products. And in a lot of times, we also bring in my team, and we're able to launch products to market very, very quickly.
And could you define what is quickly?
So in most cases, we help startups go from idea to an MVP launched in about 90 days.
And if you weren't to do that, how long does it typically take?
Sometimes we meet startups that it would take them a year or 2 before they launch something. And to me, it's not a good sign. It's either a sign that you are not clear about who you're going after and your market, and you're just changing the product in isolation, or it's a sign that you don't have a mature and capable team and you're just struggling with your tech.
So it sounds like you're really helping them on a couple of fronts. On one, you're helping them identify some of their structural weak points that maybe they're not tested right now, but they could be tested next year or the year after that. And you're also helping them stay abreast of competition and helping them perhaps save money or use it more efficiently. Is there anything else?
I think a lot of what we help, especially for like early stage and first time founders, where I see them struggle is they have a very big vision and they want to execute it. And a lot of them think I'm going to start and build the big vision on day one. And part of what we teach them to do, and we work with them closely to do, is you want that grand vision, but you don't want to start building that grand vision. The purpose of a startup, maybe one way I can share this is that the startup is not a small version of a big company. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs start to execute on that. A startup in the early stage, it's a series of experiments where you have a very clear hypothesis of here, like I need 1, 2, 3, and if these things are right, then I'm going to be right. And what you're trying to do with your product is to either quickly validate or invalidate your hypothesis so that you can move to the company building portion of the exercise. And so maybe let's see if I can find a concrete example of this. let's say I want, I'm launching a new type of AI, right? Now, if I think about a product, this could be, I need to sign up, I need to sign in, and I need to kind of go in and use this AI tool, and then I have a reporting capabilities, and then maybe, if we take, let's consider an example, hypothetical example of AI and ads, right? So I might be saying, okay, you know what, I want to create an AI platform for me that will generate the content for an ad, and then launch the ad to an ad network, and then measure the performance of the ad and maybe change it on the fly. And it might be a very big undertaking, but what we want to get to the bottom of is what is the critical flow, or what is the critical hypothesis that you're trying to validate, right? And I'm probably one of the only or the few CTOs who will say, I don't want to build tech. I don't think you should build tech. I think you want to start with doing things that don't scale, and sometimes it's essentially just do things with people as opposed to try to build too much tech and try to change it.
So it sounds like you're more than just a fractional CTO. You're also a fractional CEO and mentor, strategist, etc. Is that right?
And that is something that I help with. That's correct. Yes, and a lot of this came from the on the field experience. I've been a solo founder before, so I've launched, like, my own startups. I've probably launched 6 startups over the years that were my own. And to me, it's a lot of the things that I learned. Well, it's because of all the mistakes. Because I've been always a technologist, so building product and building tech was the easy part for me. And I've always struggled when, like, I could build the thing, and I built the thing, and then I tried to take it to market. And the first time I did it, I knew nothing about sales and marketing, and so I built it, and nobody came. And I'm like, wait. Everybody told me that you build it and they'll come, but nobody's here. So what am I doing wrong? And that led me on a path to understand more the marketing side of things, the go-to-market part of it. It's also worth mentioning, as in my career while working for the startup in Canada and while working for Ericsson, I had also a sales role. So I actually had a sales quota to meet. And my quota was a few $1 million. So I had to quickly get up to speed, because if I didn't meet my quota, I would be fired. So I had to learn also the sales aspect of things.
Wow, it's like learning everything. And you mentioned being a solo founder, and you alluded to perhaps, I guess, having a partner. Do you think it's sometimes better to be a solo founder, sometimes better to be a partner? Could you unpack a little bit about some of the considerations that a founder might have deciding whether or not to go alone or to have a partner?
After I've done it alone a few times, I would say I would almost always prefer to have a co-founder or partner. But I've also made mistakes when I picked the wrong partners. So the journey itself, it's extremely, when you watch the news, when you look at the media, the narrative is, the lone genius, right? The guy who's sitting in the room, like Zuckerberg is painted in that, if you watched the movie about Zuckerberg, he's painted as a lone genius sitting in the room and working on things. But almost always there's either a co-founder or there's a team, and there's mentors around the founder. And, we always have the narrative that it's the guy who made it, but you never see the support network and the people around the person. And I think that is critical to anyone who's trying to do something that is truly big, revolutionary, different. You need people around you. And now, the question is, do you need these people as partners? Do you hire those people? I don't, that part is not super relevant. I think you can hire the right people if you have the resources. And you can partner with people if you have the resources. The key is to make sure that you and your partners are aligned on the long term. Like, what is it that we're going to do? Because a lot of people get in trouble where there is, first of all, you're not aligned on the long term, right? I got into one of the companies I got into, it was the 3 of us. And I was very, very aligned with one of the founders, and one of the third founder was not aligned with us. And so we were always dragging one person along who didn't want to put in the time and at some point didn't want to put in more money, and then didn't want to sell, and we ended up in a deadlock that we can't get rid of the guy and we cannot keep him, and we had to shut down. So sometimes it's as expensive as we made a very big mistake, and so your partner is the it's the most critical thing that you do, and it can make you and break you. Yeah.
Wow. Your clients, are they primarily based in North America?
For the most part, yes. So we work with Canadian startups, US startups, but we've also worked with startups out of Australia and the UK.
Do you notice perhaps a cultural or environmental difference between a startup in, say, the United States and a startup in Canada?
US and Canada, not so much, but between US, Canada, and Europe, it's very different. I think US entrepreneurs are generally more aggressive. And I like that. I like the pace is different. And I think Europe itself, a lot of countries in Europe, the entrepreneurs themselves are more relaxed. But I can tell you it's not just that. The regulations in Europe are different. And I think some of them are really bad for entrepreneurship. Because, for example, like here it's easy to bankrupt a company. In Europe, there could be implications on the bankruptcy side of things. You can go to jail as a founder for bankrupting a company in certain places, which I'm like okay, so then you get less people taking risk.
Right.
That's bad.
Yeah, you mentioned learning through mistakes before. I think that's 99% of learning comes from failure, if you will. So if you increase the risk to making mistakes, you increase the cost, then you're kind of, I think, making it harder to experiment and be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and and now that it becomes like the risk is so high. Now we're talking about jail time, right? And I think some of that is required, right? To be honest with you, to be fair, also, if you're scamming people for a lot of money,
right,
you should probably go to jail. But if you're making an innocent mistake, or the business is not viable and you need to shut it down,
yeah,
you should not have a legal implication that you're going to end up in jail. I think it's too high of a bar.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they can balance that with context. But yeah, that's interesting. Some brilliant startups come out of Europe. So I have a lot more respect for them now, knowing what the gauntlet is. Could we talk a little bit about BitLab, your company, and some of the products that you offer? You have a tech startup operating system, a tech rescue operating system. Could you just give us like a high-level overview of those 4 products?
So there's essentially, we work with 4 segments of companies. One is the early stage startups. These are entrepreneurs who are either trying to launch a company for the first time, or it's serial entrepreneurs who have had other companies and now they're looking for the tech acceleration. So that's kind of the startup. The scale up is a little bit different. This is a company that launched an MVP in the market, and now they're starting to experience growing pains, right? It could be about how do I scale because the traffic is insane, or now I have a big roadmap and my core team is busy developing the core features, and I need another team just to come in and expedite things. The tech rescue, we work with both startups and established companies where more or less they built a product, but now they're struggling. They might have a team that's the wrong team, or they might have gotten into legal trouble or disputes with other development agencies. And what we do in these cases is essentially you kind of come in and try to rescue the project. So it could be your delivery 6 months late, 9 months late. There's even penalties. So some example, one of the clients we worked with, it was a fairly complex hardware and software product, and they needed to ship it on a certain date, and every month delay meant $100,000 in penalties. And they were working with the agency, without naming where they're based, but essentially they were working with an agency, and when the CEO engaged with us, he's like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but I can't seem to ship anything out of the door, and we fix some bugs and then 15 more bugs appear. So we fix one thing and 10 things break, and things keep breaking all the time. So we go in, and the first thing we do is really just like an assessment to understand is the vision clear? Does the team know what they're going to be working on? Where's the technical leadership, especially for something complex where it involves hardware and software? You want to expect a certain kind of leadership, architecture, design. And so in that case, when we engaged with them, it became very clear. The CEO himself was very clear about what he wanted to do. He was an expert at his field, but he got paired with a team of juniors who really didn't understand the hardware, didn't understand the software. And when I came in just to look at their tech stack, it made absolutely no sense. They had, and I don't know kind of how technical is your audience. I'll try to keep it, surface level. But if I come in and I find 16 technologies that shouldn't be in a stack, and we're like, oh, they had PHP and Apache running on hardware. PHP and Apache is web technology. Why the heck is it running on hardware? I'm like, okay, maybe there's a reason. And as I started to dig, in that case, it turns out they onboarded a bunch of juniors who are like straight from university to work on a very complex hardware and software project. And it's not the team's fault, by the way. I'm not trying to make them sound incompetent. I think the incompetence was on the agency side, having a bunch of juniors and no technical and no senior leadership on that team. And so we identified that. And then he's like, okay, how do we save this, right? And so what we did is essentially said, okay, let's try to work with your existing team, because getting a team in, there's a learning curve, there's kind of know-how, there's a few things that have to happen to onboard a team. So we started trying to kind of work with their existing team, but then we quickly realized it's not going to happen, it's not going to work. What we ended up doing is bringing our own team, and we had the deadline looming, so we couldn't kind of rework a lot of stuff. And we found like hardware issues that you can't, the problem is this: software mistakes are easy to fix. It's a bug, you changed some code and it's done. But mistakes in hardware design, it means you have to go back to the drawing board, literally draw new schematics, go print it, go source it. You're sourcing new hardware. So in his case, it was a nightmare because we can't iterate on hardware as fast as we can iterate on the software. So we ended up kind of cobbling together a few external solutions and kind of just like finding workarounds to be able to ship on time. And that bought us enough time to go back and redesign and rework it. But luckily, we managed to deliver it in time so that he didn't have the penalty. So he technically shipped the hardware and the software on time. Now, behind the scene, it was held together with duct tape, but we made it work. And then eventually we went back and we kind of have, now we have a breather. So we redesigned the hardware properly, redesigned the software properly, simplified the heck out of the stack that had like 20 technologies to 3. And then it's smooth, right? And the founder, like the biggest takeaway is like, man, thank you, because now I can sleep at night. Knowing that I've actually shipped something good for my customers.
Yeah, that's an incredible story, and really demonstrates not just your value, but also just how thick the forest is, like how many variables you'd have to consider. I mean, it's more than any one person could possibly predict. Are there any potential customers that you say no to, that you determine they're not a good fit for your products?
Absolutely. And to me, there's a few things that I look for in founders. The first one is clarity. I don't want to work with someone who's vague about what they want to achieve, because that translates into, if you're vague about your vision and it's blurry, it means you're going to keep changing it as we're actually building things. And that's not conducive to building good things. It's not conducive to building great products. It's not conducive to communicating to your customers. So if you're vague, your whole thing is vague. What we want to do is we want to make sure, and it's okay. Sometimes you start with that vague vision, but as we work with you, we want to see that we're able to guide you to clarity and you're able to follow that. And if you're still vague a month from us engaging, it's not going to go anywhere, right? And to me, the reason I do this is I want to build software that truly saves lives. I can put in the hands of people and have people use it. And so sometimes I have founders come to me who are like, hey, I have the money. And I'm like, okay, great, but money is not everything. Yes, you have money to build, but if I know I'm going to build something and nobody's going to ever use it, I don't want to build it. I'd rather not. There's a ton of agencies out there. Please go work with them. I want to ship products that we're proud to be shipping. We want them in the hands of people, and we want you to succeed. Like, even if I help you build this thing now, and you struggle to take it to market, it's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth. And I don't have a good case study to show, right? I'd rather help someone build something good and take it to market and win with it, because now they're happy. Now they're sharing it with other founders, and it's like a win-win-win for everyone involved, right? So that's the kind of founders. So kind of clarity is something we look for. And we also look for chemistry, because I think, I want to work with people who want to play a long-term game and see the world. I wouldn't say the same way I look at it, but we have to have certain level of alignment on foundation about doing business, and certain level of alignment around how we view product, how we care about experience. Like a good example, the other day, a client came to us and was like, hey, I need help to build this. And we looked at his mock-ups, and I'm like, did you have a good designer, right? And to me, it was just an innocent question. He's like, yes, what do you mean? I worked on this design for ages. And when I looked at it, I'm like, man, how do I tell him his baby's ugly? It's always a hard conversation to do. But I said, listen, look, like, I don't think this is good experience. And we went down the path, and I kind of broke it down for him. This is not good, this is not good, this is not good. And he's like, no, I'm convinced that this is great. And I'm like, okay, but to me, I see these flaws. And based on these flaws, I honestly don't want to work on it. Like, I don't want to build something ugly. I want to put something beautiful to the world. And so it could be some of that going on. So these are kind of the things that I vet for. And then I vet, especially if I feel I have, more experience than you do on the entrepreneurship side. And especially one thing we didn't cover is sometimes I actually angel invest in startups that we work with. And in that case, I'm also kind of wearing my investor hat and looking at this founder and asking myself, is this founder coachable? And maybe you don't have to listen to me. Let's say I'm full of shit. Don't listen to me. But are you able to take advice from other people? This could be your customers. This could be other investors. It could be partners. Are you able to take in that advice and discern what's good advice and what's bad advice and act based on it? Or you're too stuck in your own ways in a certain way, and then you're not able to move on and you're not able to act. And that's dangerous for a founder. Steve Jobs, though, is a good example of, he had a very clear vision. Yes, he was, an a-hole in certain ways. But the guy had the clarity, had the vision, and knew when to say yes and when to say no to things. But he had also his finger on the pulse of the market, of what they need. So we want to make sure you have that. And if not, your line of defense for that is being able to listen. And if you can't take in opinions, and you have to have a thick skin, right? Like, you're gonna hear your baby's ugly, and that's okay. And this is something I struggled with earlier in my career, because it's hard not to take that feedback personally. It's your baby, right? And you don't want your baby to be called ugly. You don't want your idea to be called stupid. But I think part of becoming a good founder is having thick skin to be able to take that feedback and discern, like, what is the purpose of this person giving me that feedback? Is it really, like, is he trying to kind of, destroy my beliefs? Maybe that's bad feedback. I want to ignore it. But in a lot of times, if it's an investor who's trying to kind of say, hey, dude, I've seen 30 startups this week and I've seen successful ones, and they're doing it this way. So maybe consider looking at these things. And you're not. I think you're missing out, and you're slowing yourself down. It's all about that pace.
So you have tech startup OS, tech scale up OS, tech rescue OS. Talking about the investor angle, you also have tech diligence OS. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So this is more tailored to investors. So there are investors we've been doing business with for the last 5-6 years. What we do for them is either we come in and we start with due diligence to some of the startups. So maybe they want to invest in a certain company, and they're doing the financial due diligence. This is not something we do, but we will come in and look at their tech stack and see, is the code legit? Do you have, we look at intellectual property around licenses around the code. And this is one that many first-time founders find surprising. I'll give you a crazy story. So one company, for one of the investors, we were vetting a company that was doing like a social media for gamers. Great idea. We think it's a brilliant idea. And so day one, I come in and I kind of receive access to the code from the founding team. And the first thing I pull is that they built that social network on a framework. And so the first thing I pulled is the licensing terms for that framework. And clearly in that license, which is in the source code, something that says, you cannot, essentially, like, it prohibits commercial. Like, you can take this platform, use it as open source and get people to use that social network, but you can never commercialize it. And the whole purpose of this company existing is to commercialize. So they invested about $250,000 building on top of this platform. And I came in 1 minute and I'm like, hey, sorry guys, this is not investable because you use something that is kind of wrong license. You cannot sell this, you cannot commercialize this, you're gonna have to go to court. And so this is an example of some of the things we look at in kind of when we do a code audit or like a technology audit on a startup. We want to make sure they built the right technology, right? And again, I don't want to make it sound perfect. Like, a lot of times we see code and it's not perfect, and that's okay. This is not the point. The point is the team aware of kind of what they built, and then are there fundamental technology problems, right? Like, do you have a tech stack that is very expensive to maintain? It's gonna impact your unit economics at the end of the day, and it's gonna impact your go-to-market and how much you're paying over time. So we look at, is there a decent code quality, best practices around the code itself? Because at the end of the day, that's an asset. That's part of your assets, and you want to make sure that asset is investable. And then we kind of look at the engineering team, how they run, and then we look at the code base itself. Do I have a solid intellectual property in there? And then we report that back to the investors. And that's part of the due diligence process. And oftentimes those investors will also kind of bring us when there's like fire in their portfolio, right? Like, oh, this startup is having this particular challenge. Can you go and help them? And so we kind of tend to rotate between different startups in their portfolios.
So you're looking at where the company is, where the founder is, and where the assets are, but you're also looking at signals. How do they respond to outside stimuli? How does the founder respond to feedback? How do they respond to this problem that we uncovered, or this, like you said, inefficient code? Are they aware of it? What are their plans?
Yeah.
And that will give you some information as to what the next steps may be, either helping them or maybe separating at that point. Is that right?
Yes. And it's also worth to note that this also depends on what stage the startup is in, right? So there's a great chart. I can find it and send it to you offline. Okay. That talks about the kind of what stage the startup in and what investors are looking at, right? If you're early stage, technology risk is a big one. So we want to make sure you have the right CTO, the right or technical co-founder, or maybe you yourself technical, because that's where your highest risk is. Then when you're maybe in Series A, in the kind of Series A part of the game where you've actually established, you have an MVP in the market, you're starting to find product market fit. So if you have a product, we're looking at your go-to-market risk. If you have a product and you're already in the market, we look at what's called the TAM expansion risk. So depending on the stage you're in, we might be evaluating that startup on different metrics or different things.
Is any startup, like, when does a startup become too mature for your offers? Because it looks like you mentioned that 100,000 employee company, the culture being different. I mean, that's almost the size of a city. When is a startup too big or too mature for you?
If you have a mature team, so I would put it this way. Anyone in Series A and after is usually not a good fit for what we do, because usually if you're at that point, you must have a stable, mature engineering team. So the moment you have an engineering team, I would say, of more than 20 people, we're not the right fit for you. We work in the very, very early stage to you trying to kind of make your way out of MVP into Series A. But if you have a CTO and if you have a team and things are humming along and you kind of in the market, we can't. We're not the best person. We're not in the best position to help you.
You've been in the game a long time, 17 years, pre-financial crisis, I guess right around, perhaps even pre-smartphone. What have been some of the general mindset changes towards entrepreneurship, either from a startup founder or from an investor, just like the entrepreneurial climate. Could you talk about that over the past, say, couple of decades?
My God, it's huge. The shift is huge. Like it was when I look at the startups and the founders today, they have it way easier than when I started. Like I started my first startup when I joined the first startup. This was 2006, 2007, and I was in a third world country at the time. So there was, internet was still, I wouldn't say new, but it was fairly new. There was little to no entrepreneur education. We're lucky these days because you have somebody like Alex Hormozy, who's like, when I started, there was no Hormozy, there was no Russell Brunson, there was nobody that talks about this. Like I think the oldest kind of entrepreneurial voice that I'm aware of is Steve Blank, and even like Steve Blank has really good books. The first one was, I think, called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and there's another one called The Startup Owner Manual. Like these were all, I think, 2010, 11. So previously to that, there was nobody talking about this stuff. I was doing this stuff when nobody was talking about entrepreneurship. TechCrunch was new, so people didn't have the resources. That's one. Two, back in those days pre-cloud, I managed fleets of servers by hand and by scripts. Like today, you have Amazon AWS, and you say, hey, run 20 servers of this thing. And yeah, just make sure, when the load gets high, make sure you run 20 or 30 servers of this thing. I used to do this with scripts by freaking hand, right? It was hard to manage. It was like hardware was expensive. Servers were expensive. There was no cloud provisioning of servers. You literally had to call the company and say, hey, install 20 racks for me or 2 racks for me because I want to have these servers and I want to run. And so there was no scaling and auto scaling. So the technology wasn't there. Now with AI, the productivity that you're able to get out of engineers is insane. And I would say the last year, right, since GPT, I think GPT was a big game changer. The barrier to entry to entrepreneurship in 2023, you have no excuse. Honestly, you have no excuse. You have all the education, all the resources, and then you're connected to experts thanks to all the social networks, founder dating. All of these things exist today that didn't exist when we started. And if anything, I see that the barrier to entry becomes easier and easier and easier. Yet what's sad is sometimes people fail to take advantage of all of these things and still are stubborn to try to do things the hard way. Like there are experts, take advantage of them. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs tend to be inefficient with how they allocate resources, trying potentially to do a lot of things themselves. And that's okay. I think, like, I'm stubborn in certain ways, and I know that there are certain things that I just have to go through them myself. But there's a lot of things that I know if I go read a book, watch a YouTube, or more importantly, if you're at my level, I'm no longer there, because I think like there's books that I sit down and read, yes, and I invest 8 hours, 12 hours into a book, yes. But in certain things, I want acceleration. So I will go find the best person in that thing, pay him a big chunk of money. I don't mind paying $10, $20, $30, $40,000 to solve a problem, right? I understand that I'm in a different level, but this could mean, like, to you, this could be $1,000, $2,000 that you invest into something, but then it's the acceleration. Instead of me spending 18 hours to learn about a problem and do it, it's a good way to do it if I truly believe that this is something I want to learn as a skill. But if all I want is the ultimate outcome of this thing, I'd rather go pay somebody $5,000 to go set it up, right? I'll give some examples of that. Okay. Email marketing, right? Like email automation and kind of sending out mass emails. Do I want to, like, I know enough about it. I probably read a few books about it. We do this today. But it's not something that I want to invest 30 hours, 40 hours to understand the nuances of how to set up the DNS and do I set up like Gmail or do I set up this and should I use MailChimp or should I use... No, I'd rather not deal with any of this. I'd rather go get a pro, spend $5,000 with the pro, have him set up all of these systems but I want him to teach me, right? But I want the distilled knowledge, I want the distilled education, and I want the meta learning about it, right? I don't want to get to the nuance of DNS and SPF and DKIM, which, I mean, for me, I'm aware. But there's a lot of nuance that maybe you should not be aware of. Maybe this is not the best investment of your time as a CEO or as a CTO or as a founder. So this is where, it becomes important for a founder to think of the return of investment with every single thing they do. Because at the end of the day, there's two resources. There's time and there's money. And you usually pay money to accelerate time. And so what I want to do is I'm at a place where I'm like, I can afford to spend more money to accelerate time. If you're just starting out, you don't have as much money to play with or to use, you still need to be able to kind of audit your time and know what are the things that are like a massive time suck, but what are the things that are a time investment. And there are things that I'm glad I spent the money and I spent the time learning, because I believe that every founder and every startup, there's like and I haven't talked about this before, but every entrepreneur, every founder has a skill stack. There's a stack of skills that kind of build upon each other, and if you're missing one of them, you can't be successful.
Yeah, that's really great advice. It sounds almost like an art, determining what to learn and what to delegate. And I'd like to, you mentioned Steve Jobs, you mentioned the importance of having a vision, not being too stubborn. What are some of the traits for a successful startup? Like if someone's thinking, I want to start my own company, what are some of the things that they should look for in addition to perhaps, am I the right balance of stubborn?
I think let's try to break that down. So we talked about founder, and so to me, it all starts first of all with the founder and themselves. And everybody talks about product market fit, problem solution fit, but no one, or I haven't seen a lot of people talk about startup founder fit. I meet a lot of founders on a day-to-day basis that somebody might come to me and say something like, hey, I want to build an AI HR company. And I'm like, okay, so how many years have you spent in HR? Oh, no, I don't know anything about HR. Okay, so do you have AI background? No. And so I like to call these parachute founders, is that they, go on a plane, land on a parachute, they land in the middle of nowhere, and they're trying to start something. And to me, that's a recipe for failure. Can you succeed? Yes, but to me, if you want to succeed that way, if I land in a new domain, the first thing I want to do is basically spend time learning about that domain and understanding it. If I know nothing about HR, I can't go immediately to, I know nothing, now I'm going to go build this app, right? And I start mocking up screens and thinking about the flows. I'm like, dude, you know nothing about the process. To me, it starts with like how much of an expert you are with the process. And this, Peter Thiel, his book 0 to 1 talks about it, and he called it secrets. Like, what secrets do you know about that domain? What secrets do you know about the way the world works for that area that no one else knows? And if you're a parachute founder, you know no secrets. There's nothing for you to know. In fact, if you think about it as an idea maze, I think a startup is just trying to navigate a maze of ideas. And you don't know the lay of the land. If you're playing chess, you don't know what's on the chessboard. You're gonna die. Like, you're gonna die in so many ways that you're not even aware of. And so your goal as a founder is to, first of all, understand what's the board, what's that layout of the board in front of you. So that's important, is that you have a founder who has the experience, has the knowledge, has the know-how, knows the secret sauce, and also, more importantly, have the passion. The curse that I wouldn't wish upon my enemies is to have to work on something you have no passion for, because it feels like torture. And I've done that before, by the way.
Right.
You want to have that, because at the end of the day, like, drive has to come from somewhere. And I think you can only push an idea, and especially when things get difficult, you can only push so much before you kind of say, okay, I'm going to throw in the towel, I give up. And so if you don't have that passion, you don't have that big why behind what you're doing, not going to go places. So these are things that we look, which is kind of the founder. Then you go, so if assuming the founder is passionate about that domain, right? And I think passion and knowledge, you need both. But if you don't have the knowledge and you have the passion, you're able to get up to speed, but you're going to spend a bunch more time. So that's one, which is kind of the founder. Then we touched upon the communication of the founder, because you should be able to communicate to your investors and to the customers and to even recruit your team. You have to have a solid base of communication. Everything else will flow from that. Then we go into the skills that you either have to learn yourself or you have to acquire people who are good at these skills, which is, it's marketing, right? I don't believe anyone, like you can be the best technologist in the world. If you don't understand marketing, if you can't tell people about the product, too bad, nobody's going to come, right? So marketing becomes part of that skill stack. Sales, and marketing and sales, we find them a lot conflated, but marketing is how you let people know that thing exists, and sales is the process it takes to kind of convert them from knowing that thing exists for them to be onboarded into that thing and becoming happy customers, right? Then there's product, and product is this whole skill set in itself, like how to build good products, beautiful products, and I'll call them also addictive products, because you can drive people to kind of use your product probably once, right? And now, though, they either stick or they don't stick. And so being able to create an addictive product that people are going to stick to is the part of the game. Especially for SaaS, what I've seen in some of the SaaS startups is that it's a leaky bucket. Like you're onboarding a bunch of people, but then they're churning the next month on the other end. And it's not a sustainable business. You don't have a sustainable startup until you fix that leaky bucket. So you want, sales and marketing will drive the people in the door, but then you need the retention. And that is usually, it's a good product. And product is not just the technology. And a lot of people think, oh yeah, great, I built the app. It's the product. The product is also every touch point with the customer. The product is also the communication you're doing with them. The product is also how they feel as they're using your product, and how they feel as they interact with your support team. Those are part of the product that you cannot separate them. It's the value that you got.
That's a really good point. 75% of venture-backed startups fail. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a good statistic.
So how do you measure success, given that you're basically getting them to Series A?
I think in the very early days, your success is not measured by number of users or dollars in the bank, but by how fast you can learn in a week.
Okay.
It's like if you're kind of don't have a product market fit. So I would define it a little bit differently between a startup that has product market fit and doesn't. If a startup has product market fit, the success is probably number of users, number of transactions. And again, number of users is not necessarily the best metric. I think a critical part of what a founder should define in the early days is what are these metrics for their product. It could be the number of users, but most often we don't find that as a good proxy. It could be the number of transactions in a marketplace. Like it doesn't matter how many users, because it's counterintuitive, but once you have a certain number of customers, if you're able to monetize them more and more and more and higher, right, you can still have a great product. And you don't necessarily have to kind of keep getting as many customers in the door. Your MRR becomes high enough, and if your business is profitable enough, you'll be, and then if your customers are referring. So there's different metrics, and I think part of the startup and the founder journey is to define what these metrics are and keep focusing on these metrics and just keeping them moving, right?
Right.
Early stage, because if you're still not, vague about your niche, vague about your audience, still figuring this out, the only thing you can measure reliably is the pace of learning, right? And some proxies that I think of for the pace of learning is how many customer conversations did I have this week? I might also have my hypothesis about certain things that if they're right, my bet is right, my startup is right, I'm going to win eventually.
Yeah.
And so I'm testing how many of these hypotheses have I tested this week. These are good metrics for you before you found your kind of MVP and traction. Once you're MVP and after, it's dollars in the bank, number of transactions happening, number of users, number of active customers. These are good metrics.
Perhaps I misspoke earlier. I imagine you're not taking all startups to Series A. Series A might not be a good fit for certain startups. So is that a decision tree that you help them navigate? Like perhaps you don't, maybe this isn't the right path for you.
I mean, the big thing, at least in the last couple of years, is like bootstrap startups, right? So I think maybe we should change the narrative slightly to say, hey, like venture capital, there's a whole bunch of companies that exist today in the market, like Taplio is a good example. Like MailChimp is a good example. Those were bootstrapped from the ground up. They hit millions and billions of dollars, and they never took VC money. And I can tell you that working with the VCs, if VCs are, there's a lot of startups that are pretty damn good startups, but a VC will pass on because a VC is thinking about a particular multiplier because he's thinking about his return on investment on a transaction, right? I think a good way to put yourself in a VC's shoes is this, to say, I have millions of dollars that I can allocate to. There's so many options, right? I can put them in the stock market. I can put them in this. I can put them in crypto. I can deploy it in liquidity. I can do so many things with my dollars. But I want the highest leverage activity. And if you view the world from that lens, you're vetting for companies that are likely to jump from $1 million to $100 million to $1 billion. And there are companies that there are wonderful companies that can exist from the 1 million to 50 million, 20 million, 30 million that are not a good fit for a VC, but they're still going to be wonderful businesses and they're investable, and there's like private equities firms that are going to invest in these. And so there is a spectrum there. And I think it's helpful for founders to navigate, am I $1 billion or not? Because if not, the VC game itself is all, I'm better off kind of working with private investors, with maybe angels. And there's a whole bunch of like venture studios that are coming online, at least in the last 2 years. This is like a whole big movement around venture studios. So, and then there's always bootstrapping as an option or partnering with people as an option. So there's a lot more funding vehicles that are available to entrepreneurs today that, again, if I go back 10, 20 years ago, none of this stuff existed, right?
Right.
It's all new.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing so many great insights from your time in the space, like 17 years plus. bitlab.co is your URL. Is there anywhere else that you would like to guide people?
We're big on LinkedIn. We just hit 10,000 followers this morning on LinkedIn. So we're big on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. And we're pretty much everywhere. We're on LinkedIn. We're trying to be on Instagram. We're just starting Instagram, YouTube. We're starting the podcast, and David would love to have you on the podcast at some point. And so yeah, we're on all the platforms. Most of our content now we're starting to distribute on YouTube specifically and LinkedIn. Okay. And yeah, would love to connect with founders. You can visit bitlab.co. And David, thank you so much for having me today. I really, really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the time.
It was an absolute pleasure. We'll put those links in the show notes. And thank you once again, and best of luck out there in the entrepreneurial landscape.